Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CG podcast, where we explore the legacy of the COVID-19 pandemic on science, society, and public health policy. I have with me today our guest, Cristiano Codagnone, who's a professor of sociology at the University of Milan. He's the author of many articles on the socioeconomic impacts of COVID during the pandemic, including multiple longitudinal surveys on well-being, mental health, and economic consequences. And in February of this year, he published a new book with a co-author with the title, The Leviathan with the Feet of Clay, the COVID disaster, the rhetoric of fear and scientism, which is a translation from the Italian. The book is in Italian. So thank you very much for joining us today, Cristiano.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm really curious about this title, The Leviathan with the Feet of Clay. Can you let us know what the meaning of it is and how you came to call your book by this title?
Well, the title came to mind when also I decided to write this book, and it was The Leviathan was chosen by Thomas Hobbes as a representation of sheer power of the state. And I felt that on my skin when one of my sons was forced to come back to Italy because of lockdown. He was studying in Spain. And at that point, I felt how much freedom they were taking away from us. And so I first started to think about the Leviathan. Then, as I did my research for the book, I added that the Leviathan was with the feet of clay, because basically what it means, they wrote decrees, they put us in lockdown, they wrote decrees about Green Pass, but they were not able to, for instance, increase what we call in Italy territorial medicines. They were not able to increase the number of GPs that could visit people at home. They were only able to prohibit behaviors, but they did nothing concretely. This is why with the clay feet. And then obviously in Italy as well as elsewhere, they built a clear, backed by the mainstream media, the government and the mainstream media have built a rhetoric of fear in generating all sorts of fears and anxiety that are not backed by any basic understanding of probability. And this rhetoric of we follow science. Right. What we do is what science tells us, which was not true, because there was not one single science. There were point of view in the academic debate, and they were not following science. So this is basically the genesis of the title.
Right. No, that's great. Interesting. And is that a common Italian saying, or did you kind of come up with that on your own?
No, I came up with that.
Okay. Right. Yeah. So thinking about the Italian response, I mean, I'm actually going to pose this backwards. So instead of getting into your thesis in the book and sort of your main points, I'm going to ask you to think to the future. So if we saw another respiratory pandemic, let's say in 6 months or 1 year or sometime in the not so distant future, do you think the Italian response would look different to what transpired during COVID, or do you think it would be a very different response? And sort of what's your sense of things?
Unfortunately, I am pessimistic, I think, and I tell you why. I think it would be exactly the same, because since 2022, we have a new government, and this new government has announced that it would change. But a couple of months ago, they published a new pandemic plan. I don't know if you recall, but Italy, when the pandemic started, did not have an updated plan, and a plan that was made in 2006.
Right.
So this new government came up with an updated plan, which basically replicated what we did in 2020. Okay. It has been criticized. They are amending it a bit, but basically I was appalled that despite the fact that this new government announced a different approach, despite the fact that they have established the inquiry committee of the parliament, basically when they were tasked to write a new pandemic plan, they wrote exactly what they did in 2020. So okay, it's too early, I think, and people still are all into this kind of vulgata mainstreams, and they would do the same.
Okay, right. And so you relate that to the Italian media's, let's say, monopoly on truth?
Yes, look, to write this book, together with my co-author Stefano Bracaletti, we have worked 3 years, going through a lot of scientific sources, looking at the narrative on the media newspaper. Apart from splinters, small web TV, and with an exception of one newspaper called La Verità, which is a far right newspaper, there wasn't one unique thought in the Italian media. There was one unique way. It was amazing what they built. We say in Italian pensiero unico, unique thought. It was very strong, and it dominated the mainstream newspaper, the TV channels.
Yeah.
They all thought that this was the right thing to do, and that we were the champions, as the government said, that we were the best in the world because of all the restriction that we applied. It's been very, very strong. It's so the position like the one we exposed in our book, which is not a journalistic position, because our book is based on more than 1,500 scientific sources, but position like ours are very minoritarian still.
Okay.
And you are, as soon as you express a critical voice, they tell you are a no-vax, a negationist, etc.
Right. So, I mean, I guess that sort of preempts the question I was going to ask, which was, how has your book been received, and have you had opportunities to, debate colleagues, be on the nightly news, publish in any of the mainstream outlets in Italy? Or yeah.
Look, although I am, originally for many years, I've always been on the left side of the spectrum. Our book has been well received only on the right. So it was reviewed on one newspaper called Libero, which is on the right. And we have been called with my co-author, to 2 TV shows, however, that are positioned on the right. And funny enough, I posted on LinkedIn, on Twitter, X, about the book. And funny enough, after I posted about my book, now when I receive notification from Twitter, many are from no-vax people that I have nothing to share with, because I'm not a far rightist.
Right.
But I think that in the culture of left and center left in Italy, they are deaf and blind to any.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty universal phenomenon for the pandemic, and there's been a couple of voices from the left, but for the most part, it's been a deafening silence. So, what about the public conversation in Italy? Have you seen any shift in public sentiment or reflections about what took place? Any sense that actually the narrative and people's perception of lockdown and vaccine green passes and other things have been revised?
Not a lot, honestly. On the other hand, I think the book has been selling quite successfully in Italy, and I have received mail from readers that are normal persons, so not part of any movement, that say that the book opened their eyes and that they were surprised, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But at the level of a macro level media debate, and I haven't seen a change of views. Okay, and also lately it's not being debated a lot. What happened is that the inquiry of the parliament created a lot of polarization and an incredible fight, because the people of the center left accuse the right that they want to do a political process, that they want to use this as a political weapon.
Right.
Whereas, I mean, my hope, and in our book, we put a number of questions that we ask to the inquiry committee, say you should answer this question because things that have come up from the book, but we could not research everything. But for the moment, it's not being very active, the inquiry committee.
Okay. For people who don't know, can you just give us a sense of what's taking place in Italy with this public COVID inquiry?
What's taking place is that upon the initiative of a number of members of parliament of the right, the Italian parliament and the Italian Senate establish by law in Italian we say Commissione Parlamentare di Inchiesta, which is a parliamentary inquiry committee that should investigate how COVID-19 was managed in the period 2020-2021. And there was a strong reaction against from politicians who were in power in that time. The Prime Minister, Giuseppe Conte, and the Ministry of Health, Speranza. It was very, the first debate were very polarized and violent in the rhetoric used. Okay, so of reciprocal accusation. In theory, this in the history of Italy, now without making any comparison, this sort of parliamentary inquiry committee have been very powerful and they have gone in depth in analyzing phenomenon. Obviously, the most famous one is the parliamentary inquiry on mafia, which has been going on for and that these committee have almost the same power as a judge, as a prosecutor. They can call all witness that they want, etc. Actually, we have tried to send our books to a few of these members of the committee, and we have tried to make ourselves known. But so far we have received no reply.
Okay. That's very, very interesting. I mean, so getting back to the book, and you mentioned sort of you have a list of questions that you think a public inquiry should be answering. What would be the top 3 questions that you think the Italian public inquiry should really focus on?
Well, one question is about why. The first question they should address, because it's never been debated in the public media, is why Italy has had such a high mortality rate. If the government officials were saying that we were the champions of restrictions, we introduced a very strict lockdown. I simply draw the 2 lines of death per 1 million inhabitants and hospitalization between Italy and Sweden. There are no lockdown. And the 2 graphs speaks for themselves and are simply laughing. First question is why mortality was so high in Italy. And because the shortcut explanation that the press has given is that we are a very old population. We did some comparative analysis with other countries. We are not the only old country in Europe. Germany is older than us, and they had much fewer deaths. And so this is one of.
And when you're thinking about deaths, Italy had a huge spike at the very beginning in northern Italy, right? And that, to me, there's that spike and the one in New York City, and then there's also Mexico City, which I think at some points had a sort of an equally high mortality rate early on. But to my knowledge, the New York City phenomenon and northern Italy is still debated. And I know actually New York City has a public inquiry that they're trying to pass through the state Senate in the next couple of months, and I don't know if it's going to go through, but part of that inquiry is to look at why the mortality rate was so high early on. So I guess that's part of what you're talking about? Or
But we have considered the full period, and actually even in the second wave, and the mortality kept being very high in
okay.
Italy. Higher than Germany, higher than France, higher than Spain, and it has been on the same level, sometimes higher, sometimes lower as the UK.
Yeah.
And this is striking, considering at least the rhetoric of the government about we being the champions after
Okay.
China of shutting down. So that's
Is that still something that is said by Italian politicians and media?
well, this guy was former minister, Speranza. He published his own book and he's going around presenting it, and he still claims that we were the best. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
But I mean, I am a behavioral expert, and one part of our interpretation in this book, we discard any sort of conspiracy theory or economic interests. We interpret this as a process of collective irrationality, biases,
Right.
and heuristics. And when you form an idea, there is a problem of cognitive dissonance. It's very difficult for these people to change.
Right.
Backtrack and say that everything they have said was wrong and untrue.
Right. And that criticism extends also to the scientific community. I'm imagining in Italy, in the public health authorities, and although, do you think that there is some level of criticism?
Let me make a distinction. Public health authority, I mean, a representative of public health, yes, they took this mainstream view, close, green pass, vaccination. A few epidemiologists or virologists who became famous and went to TV and made a sort of new career out of this pandemic also. But then if you look at the literature, the scientific literature, there are also articles by Italian scholars who have who simply report the evidence about the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of lockdown, etc. So I think, I think that there has been a silent majority of scientists who didn't want to be called to the television, etc., and they let this handful of people, narcissistic people, wanted there and spoke about possible tragedy, millions of death, blah blah blah.
Right.
So I think the rest of the scientific community has stayed silent, and that doesn't mean that they are all on the same mainstream position.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So what would be a second question? I asked you for three. You said excess mortality in Italy.
Well, the second question would be why, understanding why at the very beginning there was this sort of decree. It was not a decree, but it was like a recommendation not to make autopsies. Because when you have a new disease, at least at the beginning, at least in a random, in a sampling way, having autopsies is very important to understand the final and ultimate cause of death.
Yeah, autopsies.
Whereas the Italian ministry say not to do them. Then a group of doctors disobeyed, and they did it.
Yeah.
And they discovered that in many cases it was a thromboembolic phenomenon that led to the ultimate cause of death, in which case there was no need for the ventilator. Okay, so that's another question, that who decided that. And the third one is there was this other now difficult to it's a bureaucratic term, difficult to translate into English. It's called circolare, that advised people to be vigilant, or check their oxygen and take tachipirina,
the tests.
So and no attempt to intervene with therapies at home.
Okay, you're talking about basic treatments.
Yeah. And
Right.
again, there have been Hippocrates is an organization. There have been groups of doctors that went around to treat people at home, and evidence is coming out that this was effective in reducing hospitalization and death. But basically, people were left to themselves, and many of the people, the oldest one, the one that were less privileged, they just left by themselves and they died in their home. Okay.
Right.
Everything went to the hospital. There was no attempt by what we call in Italian territorial medicine, which is primary care.
Right. Primary healthcare.
Yeah. Primary care, to try to treat people at home when they first got sick.
Right. And hence back to your title, The Leviathan with the Feet of Clay.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Because basically, in the past 20, 30 years, our healthcare system has become hospital-centric.
Yeah.
And so the primary care has been weakened, fewer GPs and fewer territorial unit, health unit.
Right. Yes.
But they were not able to reverse that, because they were authoritarian as China. But then China, in a few weeks or months, built new hospital and made a lot of things, and nothing of the sort happened in Italy.
Yeah. I actually remember reading, I did some papers on vaccine mandates, and I remember reading about the Italian situation, and there's a couple of good papers showing that as investment in public health decreased since the 1990s, the amount of mandates and how strict they have been, this is like childhood vaccine mandates, have increased, right? To the point where they're very strict in Italy about this right now.
It is true. Yeah, it is true. Yeah.
So I'm guessing that sort of legacy of defunding public health led to maybe government interest for the vaccine mandates and the green passes?
Well, I don't know. It's a causal attribution that is a bit will require a bit more data and information. It is a reasonable hypothesis. Right.
Well, thank you so much, Cristiano, for joining us, and I look forward to hearing more about your book and talking to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.